welcome you all to our prestigious physician forum of India, serial number 883. Just to remind you, I also chaired the CME number 784 with Dr. Aparna only. So it's 99 CME cap. So they say nervous 99s or nervous 90s. None of us is nervous. We are very confident. वो कहते हैं कि दिल की बातें दिल ही जाने. ये तब होता है जब दिल नॉर्मल होता है. जब नॉर्मल नहीं होता, हार्ट फेल हो रहा होता है, तब दिल की बातें सिर्फ इलेक्ट्रोफिजियोलॉजिस्ट ही जानता है. एंड डॉक्टर अपर्णा इज वन ऑफ द बेस्ट ऑफ देम. सो टुडे वी विल लिसन टू हर वंस मोर. मुझे पूरी याद है कि पिछली वाली सीएमई सूर्या में 784 when she had introduced us to what are the devices to be used for heart failure, who is the candidate for CRT-B, who is candidate for CRT-D, and many other things. We will clear our doubts once more today. To introduce her is just like showing a candle. I am just repeating my sentence again to the sun. She is one of us. It is her 7th CME with us. Who doesn't know? She comes from, she is head of the electrophysiology department. She has a great interest in ablation, the atrial fibrillation, heart failure, and the devices. Above all, वो जैसे आपने सुना हो कभी पारस की खासियत ये होती है, पारस बनाता है, वो गोल्ड नहीं बनाता, पारस बनाता है. तो ये पारस बनाने वाले हैं. शी इज ट्रेनिंग द यंग ब्रिगेड. शी इज ट्रेनिंग द यंग youth electrophysiologists. Very less electrophysiologists are there in India. I think in her last CME she told there are 300 for 130 million. And now we are now 140 million. So maybe they have also increased a bit. She is increasing the number of electrophysiologists. I welcome her to give her talk. I will not go more to introduce her to Milwaukee and so many attachments. Please welcome ma'am. Come and deliver her talk.
Thank you so much, sir, for your generous words and the very kind introduction. So I stand corrected. You mean to say in between my last and now there have been 99 CMEs?
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
Oh.
So you should come more often.
That's good.
9 light years now.
Wow.
99 weeks.
99 weeks. So that's very interesting. So I think as he said that, Jaya, can we have these lights a little dim, please? So I think as he rightly said that, this is good. So as he rightly said that heart failure is something that we keep learning every day. We keep reading over and over again, trying to understand the nuances of this complex process. And it's very clear now from all the guidelines that the management of heart failure has to be multidisciplinary. It cannot be the domain of the physician or the cardiologist or the electrophysiologist alone. All of us together must join hands in treating the patient who has heart failure. So trying to give you a bird's eye view and trying to speak on something very specific and particular in what I do is the implantation of devices. Not to undermine in any way, the management of heart failure is much beyond the implantation of these devices. And it has to be all of us doing it together. We must understand and remember that heart failure in India is a bigger challenge. I am certain you are aware that 1 out of 3 and 1 out of 4 in India suffers from hypertension and diabetes respectively. Suffering from hypertension and diabetes is stage A of heart failure. It is at risk of development of heart failure, and that's where your role most important. To allow your patients to live with blood pressures of beyond 140 is medical negligence. Allowing your patients to live with HbA1c of beyond 7 and 7.5 is again medical negligence, because you are now allowing your patients to step in from stage A to stage B of heart failure. What is stage B of heart failure? Stage B of heart failure is when they develop structural heart disease and they are asymptomatic. So you have to understand that your role is primary, most important, to reduce the risk of heart failure development. India is sitting at a cusp, and I feel that all of us will fall short in numbers to treat our population. You all are aware, 30-year-olds coming with high blood pressure and diabetes. Just imagine and visualize the amount of this is going to translate into heart failure. We all are going to fall short in India, so the challenge in heart failure is very large. The natural history of heart failure is relentlessly progressive and unforgiving. Those of our patients who develop heart failure, especially heart failure with reduced ejection fraction, means the ejection fraction less than or equal to 40%, they're going to have a very poor outcome. Not to say that HFpEFs are any better, but heart failure with reduced ejection fraction have a very poor natural course of their disease process. So what is this graph telling you? This graph tells you that every time the patient is admitted into a heart failure, you can see the disease is rapidly progressing and he is going to succumb to his disease very soon. Also, to understand that subset of your patients who are in NYHA functional class 2. What does class 2 mean? Class 2 means he has any symptoms. Any symptom is a class 2 symptom. So any of your patient who has heart failure with reduced ejection fraction, means EF is less than or equal to 40%, he is not stable. He is at risk of death. Imagine the number are very high. 6 out of 10, 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10, they are going to be at risk of sudden death. So don't think that your patient is not grossly symptomatic, has not had hospitalization, the ejection fraction is 35%, that he is alright. No, he is at very high risk of sudden death. Which brings me to this slide. I am sure there would have been very good speakers ahead of me who would have translated this education to all of you, that any of your patients who have heart failure with ejection fraction of less than 40% must be on the guideline-directed medical therapy. Should be on beta blockers, ARNI, SGLT2 inhibitors and MRA. I'm not speaking on newer molecules. I'm sure Dr. Kalra is going to speak and ask me about molecules like vericiguat and ivabradine. But remember, these 4 molecules have to be given before you consider device-based therapy. However, I said I will give you a bird's eye view because that's what I do. And I would like to bring your attention to the cardiac devices. They are called cardiac implantable electronic devices. They are of various types. The most complex one being cardiac resynchronization therapy defibrillator, cardiac resynchronization therapy pacemaker, implantable cardioverter defibrillator. As you can see, both of these devices have a third lead which goes from the right atrium into the coronary sinus into the epicardial part of the heart and captures the left ventricle, while the implantable defibrillator has one lead in the RA and the right ventricle, and there is no lead which goes on the left side of the heart. So it is these devices which are very complex, yet save a life and also reduce the morbidity of the heart failure. Implantable cardioverter defibrillator can either have a single lead in the right ventricle, that is a traditional ICD, or a dual chamber ICD can have two leads, one lead in the RA and one lead in the right ventricle. We have come a long way. We have certain defibrillators called subcutaneous defibrillators, wherein we do not use the venous access. Everything is present under the skin, including the defibrillator and the leads. As a result, we do not go inside the heart. So what are the recommendations of an implantable defibrillator? I don't want to make it complex with the guidelines, but I'll take you through a few cases. A lot of data has emerged that our patients need defibrillators. We must understand that there are no more trials which are ongoing which tell us that our patients need defibrillators. It is a closed chapter. They have proven themselves. So we are no longer debating in patients who have ischemic subset that they need an ICD. So I'll take you through a few cases. So this is a 72-year-old male, has undergone a bypass surgery, has ejection fraction which is less than 30%. Remember, if the EF is less than 40%, they are at a very high risk of sudden death. He comes to the emergency room with this EKG, and I already heard someone from this table say that this is a ventricular tachycardia. So whenever somebody comes to the emergency room with this kind of an ECG, which is tachycardia because the rate is more than 100, the QRS duration is more than 120 milliseconds. It is a wide complex tachycardia. You should know this patient is at a very high risk of death even in the emergency room. This is a classic example of ventricular tachycardia. So those of your patients who have coronary artery disease, which is very common in India, have an ejection fraction of less than 40%, and if have a ventricular tachycardia, you should essentially consider giving them an implantable cardioverter defibrillator. Why? Because 30% of them within the next 1 year are liable to have this problem again. So this is how an ICD looks like on a chest X-ray, and this is a cine which shows you what a defibrillator looks like in the cath lab. So this is an ICD and this is the lead which is going into the right ventricle. So to reiterate, coronary artery disease with ejection fraction of less than 35% to 40%, if they develop a VT, they need an ICD. If the ejection fraction is less than 35% and they have never had a VT and have coronary artery disease, they still warrant an ICD. So please remember that. This is a young male, that is the elderly, 76, this is a young male, has severe palpitations. I am sure we have all understood now that this is a tachycardia, this is wide complex, this is a holter of this patient because he had syncope. This is nothing but a ventricular tachycardia. Remember today, in young patients, this patient we did angiography, it was normal. In these patients today, we must do a cardiac MRI. Cardiac MRI is now easily available. We want to see the structure of the heart, so you must do a cardiac MRI. The cardiac MRI in this young patient showed that there was evidence of arrhythmogenic right ventricular cardiomyopathy. What is glaring and catching your eye is this. This is the outpouching of the right ventricle. Remember, this is the anterior structure. There is outpouching. This patient has ARVD, has had a VT, has had syncope. So this patient deserves what an implantable cardioverter defibrillator should be given. Let me draw your attention to a very common example which you will see in your clinical practice. A young male has undergone angiography, no stent was put, ejection fraction is 30%. I can even tell you it is 40% supposing. I will urge you from today onwards, from tomorrow morning when you go to your practice, if you see this example of anybody who has coronary artery disease and has EF which is 40% or lesser, ask for a holter. You must exploit the diagnostics. You must do Holter left, right and center. Why should you do? You will pick up so many arrhythmias which you can potentially save a life. We are saving more and more lives because we are exploiting the diagnostics. Use the therapeutics very judiciously. Don't give ICDs unless needed. But keep looking out for that subset. All of us on social media are seeing people dying, right? Young people succumbing to death. That's because they are passing by without being diagnosed. So exploit the diagnostics to understand the disease process. So this is an ECG Holter. You can see in the first half there is non-sustained VT, then there is sinus rhythm, again there is non-sustained VT. So whenever you see this, the patient has coronary artery disease, has LV dysfunction, has non-sustained VT, the patient qualifies for implantable defibrillator. Why should a defibrillator be given is this. So see this example, this is our heart. This is how our myocardium should be. The red, thick is a myocardium. Look at the heart, it keeps contracting all the time, 60 to 100 times a minute. I mean, it's one organ which never sleeps. So you need a very healthy myocardium for that. This is how the myocardium should be. Nice and thick and red. But you can see something went wrong here, right? This is what is called a scar. The myocardium has been replaced by a scar. Whenever there is a scar, it forms the perfect milieu for ventricular tachycardia. Why was the ventricular tachycardia coming in these patients? The ventricular tachycardia was coming in these patients simply because of this scar. Whenever there is a scar, whenever there is a scar, it sets up a perfect milieu for a re-entrant arrhythmia, and this re-entrant arrhythmia is a ventricular tachycardia. So my question to you is, when you see this, when the patient develops a scar, is there any way you can remove this scar? There is no way that you can remove this scar. So there is always a chance that your patient can develop a VT. Hence be vigilant. Your patients who have scars, which can be because of ischemia, because of COVID, because of ARVD, because of myriad of reasons. If a patient has scar and a scar of more than 10% on your MRI, the patient is at risk of sudden death. So your patient needs ICD. With that, I will move the session to the next few slides talking about reducing the morbidity of heart failure. You are all well aware about cardiac resynchronization therapy. You are aware that our patients of heart failure have intraventricular conduction defect, which is apparent on the surface ECG with a wide QRS, that is what is called a left bundle branch block. It is known that patients who have wide complex on the ECG, forget everything else, forget ejection fraction, forget heart disease, just a wide QRS on the ECG means they will die early. Not LV dysfunction. A wide QRS, ECG, they will die early. But wide QRS, LV dysfunction, they will die even earlier. So that's the message, that if your patient has a wide QRS, there will be increased mortality if they have heart disease, even more mortality if they have LV dysfunction. This is a classic example of a left bundle branch block which must not go unnoticed. A wide QRS in V6, lead 1, AVL, a deep S wave in lead V1 and V2, a classic example of wide QRS. Whenever you see LBBB with EF less than 35%, don't even think, because researchers have done good work and told us that LBBB with LV dysfunction will do well if you give them a cardiac resynchronization therapy device. So we don't need to put our minds to it. LBBB, wide QRS, patient's ejection fraction echo is EF is less than 25%, begin to think of a CRT. So that's the message that this slide is giving you. Don't read into the lines here, keep it very simple. If we are able to give our patients who are a class 1 indication, I think they are doing good service to humanity. So if your patient has EF less than 35%, has a wide QRS, means more than 120, has left bundle branch block, think of CRT and give them a CRT, because cardiac resynchronization therapy has gone beyond trials now and proven itself that it helps your patient. So again, showing you 2-3 cases. This is an ECG of an elderly male. EF is less. He has symptoms of heart failure. His QRS is wide. You can clearly see the QRS is wide. You can clearly see on the echo the LV is dilated. The guidelines tell us that you should and must offer the patient of CRT. We don't need to be the financial police. If the patient cannot afford it, he will not take it. But there are often times I think, or I'm embarrassed, shall I tell him the cost? Will he be able to afford? And it comes to me as a surprise. The patient is willing to take it. So you should offer the patient the treatment, let him decide whether he can afford it. So wide QRS, EF is less than 35, LBBB, offer the patient a CRT. This is what a CRT looks like. There are 3 leads, RA, RV. I showed you through the coronary sinus into the left ventricle, and see how we transform the ECG of that very patient. You can see the QRS has become so narrow. It is well proven that if your patients have a QRS narrowing, it will help in left ventricular reverse remodeling. Remember, remodeling is a bad thing. How can you reverse remodel? With the guideline directed drugs I told you, they have proven Army, SGLT2, beta blocker, MRA, and then add this device, your patients will get better. This is again a lady who has wide QRS, but this time has a right bundle branch block. I have repeatedly said left bundle branch block should be given a CRT. But those of your patients who are in symptomatic heart failure class 3, wide QRS more than 150, right bundle branch block, they also should be considered for a CRT. This is again an X-ray and a cine of a CRT, 3 leads capturing both the ventricles and the atrium, and the ECG becomes very good. The class of recommendation is good. I don't want to go into this part. Look at what we've done to the ECG. So narrow. So remember, in your patients of heart failure, LBBB is a class 1 indication, but even in RBBB, when your patient is symptomatic, a CRT can change the patient's life and give the patient a new lease of life with the CRT. So this would be a last slide where we change the patient's ECG with a pacemaker. This patient had, this was the ECG pre and this was the ECG post. So I would like to conclude that those of your patients who have ejection fraction which is less than 35% have CAD must consider for ICD, and those who have EF less than 35, LBBB with a wide QRS must consider for a CRT. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Dr. Nilesh. Well on time. So I think Dr. Kalra will have ample time for discussion. You can also join Dr. Parna if you are comfortable.
Dear friends, Dr. Podar sir, I think it was one of the mesmerizing talk once again after 99 CMEs. And I urge my friends to see our YouTube recording, 99 CME back, 784 was again, I'm talking about Surya. I was wearing the same shirt and she's wearing almost similar dress. So it's almost reproduced. So it's a coincidence. Well, to set the ball rolling, well ma'am, we have learned many things, refreshed many things. Just wanted to know if you newer things I came to know about. One is Barostim, new. Is it available? Is it being used by you?
We don't have Barostim yet. It is under research. It is not available in India. It is not even commercially available in the United States for for LV dysfunction patients. But yes, there is something called CCM for that subset of your patients. CCM, like I kept repeatedly saying that the ejection fraction should be poor and the QRS should be wide. What do you do for those subset who have ejection fraction poor? QRS is narrow and they can afford a treatment and they're looking out for a treatment. That is a new device which is commercially available, FDA approved. It's called cardiac contractility module. What does it do? It has one lead in the right ventricle and it has another lead in the right ventricle. It has two leads and that is what we are using today for our patients.
I very well remember, and I redirect to the same CME. You showed us the picture and the module of CCM. So I think it is one of the new advancement, and for them, those who probably are not benefited or are not candidate for the CRT and all that. So for those who are having preserved ejection fraction, is there anything, any device we can offer them?
So, heart failure with preserved ejection fraction is a very difficult subset to treat. Their mortality is high, although lesser than heart failure with reduced ejection fraction. HFpEF have actually currently we have no devices which are recommended for the treatment and management of HFpEF patients. The only treatment that we have today, which is class 1 indication, is SGLT2 inhibitor for your HFpEF patient. Other than that, symptomatically you have to give diuretics. ARNI is also a class 2B. It is only SGLT2 inhibitors which are class 1. There is no other device which you can offer to your HFpEF patient. However, maybe, now that talk of devices, you must do a sleep study, rule out OSA, and they may benefit from a CPAP.
One more interesting aspect I am asking. Very recently, President of Iran, he died in an air crash. Even our Air Marshal, I think he was one of the Rawat. He died. And they were all speculating that their app was hijacked. And hijacking I have seen and heard about. Even at AIMS, their computer was hijacked. But the Google was hijacked by someone from Bihar. And overnight he was called, okay, join us. So hijacking, is it possible for the pacemakers and the devices also? Because things are evolving.
Why not?
Even if you see it is closed device and whatever, I think wherever it originates, as you said in the last CME, that you can trace the device from the some say QR type of impression on in the X-ray. You can trace the device, see in the X-ray that which device and what model, where it originated from. Your comment.
Yes, how it goes is that the pacemakers that are implanted and do not have any ability of a Bluetooth technology cannot be hijacked because it's a closed loop. However, the problem today is of remote monitoring. So you bring out a very valid point. We have our patients on devices which are remotely monitored. So remotely monitored means that via Bluetooth or with radio frequency waves they are monitored. So yes, this is a reality, and we also are concerned about this, and this is one of the reasons that the industry and the world over, even we as the treating electrophysiologists are not permitted to change any parameter remotely. We can only see it. Does that mean it is a foolproof system? I will not have the answer with utmost sincerity to say yes, because I think the hijackers are smarter than us. So we should be vigilant, we should be careful, and this is a very valid point.
my last half question is about the chances of thrombus along the leads. Is it possible and how to tackle that?
Yes, so this is a reality and thrombi do form. They can be thrombi forming on the RA lead or the RB lead, but we don't worry about them as much because the right atrium and the right ventricle go into the pulmonary venous circulation. But yes, whenever we put anything in the left ventricle, if our right ventricular lead inadvertently enters the left ventricular cavity, we worry about clots and we have to sometimes give them lifetime anticoagulation. So right side we don't worry, left side we have to worry.
Dr. Podar, now you.
Yeah, Dr. Aparna, many of our patients, due to maybe age over 55 or 60, no symptoms, we send for pre-operative normal 2D echo. And they report the cardiologist, whoever is doing echocardiography, grade 1 diastolic dysfunction. This is very common in almost in about 50% patients. I see this in almost 50% of patients. So what is the significance and what a surgeon should know? The grade 1 diastolic function. Anything else to be done or the patient is safe for surgery?
Wonderful. So I think this is a very, very practical clinical question. If all of us right now were to have echoes done in this room, all of us together, I think barring Jaya, all of us would have grade 1 to grade 2 diastolic dysfunction. It's an aging process. Why is it an aging process? Our skin gets wrinkles as we age. The heart will also get wrinkled. So what is wrinkling of the heart? When it becomes stiffer, there is something called stiffness of the heart. It's called diastolic stiffness. So you say, I don't want to get diastolic dysfunction. Ideally, we should begin when we are young, exercise very well, eat right, drink right. Your diastolic will be better. So all of us will have grade 2 diastolic dysfunction. You don't need to worry. However, when it becomes from grade 2 to grade 3, you should not give a clearance for surgery. Because what does that imply? As soon as it moves from grade 2 to grade 3, it means the left ventricle is so stiff, the heart pressures are high, the patient can go into decompensated heart failure even on the table. But grade 1 diastolic dysfunction is of no concern.
So grade 3 diastolic dysfunction is basically heart failure with preserved ejection fraction?
Yes, if the EF is normal, it becomes heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. There are many more echo variables which tell us, apart from this parameter, that the patient has heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. So the simplest of all is this.
So you mentioned when you were showing indications of device, wide QRS or some. So wide QRS or narrow QRS? Each choice of device is different?
Yes. So if your patient must have a wide QRS if you want to implant a CRT. Should have ideally a QRS of more than 140 to 150 milliseconds. If your patient has a poor ejection fraction, the ejection fraction is less, and the QRS is narrow, you should only give ICD. So what I'm trying to say is, if the QRS is wide, think of CRT. If the QRS is narrow, ICD, because the EF is less.
Okay, so among the 4 essential medicines for heart failure, is SGLT2 inhibitor included in that?
The only medicine which has really shown its work is SGLT2 inhibitor. It is a class 1 indication.
Even in non-diabetics?
It's a class 1 indication across the spectrum of heart failure, irrespective of diabetic status.
Thank you. Doctor
Podar, your LVDT1 is just like fatty liver grade 1. We all have it. Most of us have it. Unless if your liver function is not affected, it may not be so significant. Similarly here. Thank you.
Indication of ICD non-ischemic cardiomyopathy.
Yeah, so that's a very, very good question, sir. And earlier the guidelines were putting it on the same pedestal as ischemic, now it's changed. So in non-ischemic cardiomyopathy, you should do a cardiac MRI before you offer the patient an ICD. Or if the patient has already had a VT, then you should give an ICD. But in non-ischemic ICDs, our threshold of become high. We don't opt for this. We do a cardiac MRI, we do a Holter, we try to see, is there ambient ventricular ectopy, is there a scar burden, only then we might.
Artificial intelligence है कि role if they are incorporating the ECG or heart echo, it can predict whether this patient will be having a heart failure or some arrhythmia in the future.
So I think AI seems to be AI, artificial intelligence, is beginning to have a role in every sphere.
Ma'am, mic please.
So AI has an every sphere, but AI is even more of interest to us as electrophysiologists for what you already said. So a patient comes into the clinic, he's supposing 40-year-old. If we were to put his ECG into AI to identify, is he at risk of developing atrial fibrillation? AI will tell us. You can ask me how. How will AI tell you? AI will tell you that AI has been fed thousands of ECGs of those patients who develop AF before they develop AF. So AI was told that if the P wave, what is P wave? Atrial contraction. So what is the AI trying to identify? How is the atria? How will it identify the width of the P wave, the height of the P wave? So it will take out a calculated number and know in milliseconds or microseconds that yes, this patient is at risk of developing AFib. Is he at risk of developing heart failure? Yes. It will see, does the patient have left ventricular hypertrophy? It will calculate. Does the patient have diastolic stiffness? It will calculate. Does the patient have QT dispersion? It will calculate. It will tell us all these markers. So AI is here in a big way to help our patients 3 times their illnesses.
We can start the preventive treatment for.
Well, I think preventive we have been trying and we are failing desperately. Have we been able to try to treat our patients' hypertension without AI? Have we been able to treat them effectively with diabetes, with obesity without AI? We don't need AI for that. I think each one of us needs to understand that we need to treat it effectively. I somehow feel and believe that we as clinicians have yet not understood the need of treating them well. I have always believed that whenever I do a CME, there should be a VP apparatus right here. Each one of us should have our blood pressure screened. Only then can we effectively treat the population that we're looking at. Are we treating ourselves enough? I don't think so. So AI is not needed.
Can we have CIMT also here?
Dr. Buddha.
I think that's going a bit beyond
measurement, I think very good idea.
I think just a pulse rate and a blood pressure is enough. Those of us who have high heart rates will live lesser than those who have controlled heart rates. So we must do this simple test.
I was just asking, diastolic dysfunction, grade 2 diastolic dysfunction. Have you seen that after SGLT2, it improves? The grade 2 becomes grade 1 or grade 3 becomes grade 2. You said don't give surgical fitness. Do you have to wait for the diastolic dysfunction to be improved echocardiographically to give fitness? Or you just go symptom-wise or NT-proBNP-wise?
Very good. So I never said do not give fitness at grade 2. I said at grade 3. Do not give fitness at grade 3. Not at grade 2. First. Second point. Your question is, do SGLT2 inhibitors help in reverse remodeling? That's the question. Reverse remodeling. Well, I cannot say that I have seen it happen. Symptomatically I have seen it happen. But the trials are enough and plenty which say that SGLT2 inhibitors do help in reverse remodeling. So do the ARNI, so do the beta blockers, so do the MRI. So if you talk of just a diastolic parameter, now you're talking of heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. So SGLT2 inhibitors have proven themselves. Hence they are a class 1 indication. They help in improving diastolic stiffness. They help in inflammation. They help in fibrosis. They are anti-fibrotic. So there are trials and research enough that yes, SGLT2 inhibitors will help. You don't need to wait for diastolic parameter to get better. But if your patient for surgery has a diastolic parameter of grade 3, you must discuss with your cardiologist. He needs up-titration of his diuretics. You see his NT-proBNP will be elevated. You must control those symptoms, which can happen in the next few days. Diastolic will take weeks.
NT-proBNP should be done only in diastolic failure phase 3 or 1 or 2 also.
So NT-proBNP is a biomarker which you offer to our patients anytime you suspect heart failure, irrespective of diastolic parameters.
No, even if there is no symptom, only on echo there is diastolic.
You don't need to do NT-proBNP for that. If your patient comes with any symptoms and signs, then do it.
One of the latest development in devices is the development of leadless devices. Your comments on leadless?
So I think that's again a very good point to bring out, leadless pacemakers. So leadless pacemakers have now been around for the past, I would think, 8 to 10 years. Leadless pacemakers are by far the most expensive pacemakers. But we don't implant them. Fortis Escorts we do maximum number of implants, but we are not advocates of leadless pacemakers. And why is that? Leadless pacemakers have a niche presence. They should only be offered to that subset who does not have a venous access or has had recurrent infections on both the sides. Leadless pacemakers, despite being most expensive, have an issue of AV synchrony. So leadless pacemakers are very good, very niche, should be offered to the right subset.
Dr. Aparna, good evening. Dr. Thakur this side. I just wanted to ask about the pricing of the implants, number one. And on a lighter note to Dr. Kala sir. Dr. Kala sir, when is your 100th birthday? Because for 99 CME you have won the same shirt. We will pay you a new shirt. Thank you.
The cost of devices is consistently coming down. The cost of a pacemaker begins at proper dual chamber MRI compatible pacemaker today is 1.80, which used to be 3 lakhs earlier. The cost of what is the starting price, which are very good devices. You don't need to go for the higher end fancy ones. The cost of an implantable defibrillator is about 4 lakhs. The cost of a CRT-D is roughly around 8 lakhs. The cost of a CRT-P is about 5 lakhs to 5.5. So these are the cost of the devices. And I always believe and tell my patient that a basic device does very good job.
Thank you.
So let me begin, Dr. Aparna, by saying it's a wonderful talk, and every time you talk, you go back home. Lot of wisdom. So talking about the HRS last week, just a few days back at Boston, were you there, ma'am?
No, I wasn't.
Oh, how unfortunate. So some late-breaking clinical trial presented on ablations, CRTs, ICDs, CCM, and the Tri-CRT, leadless pacemakers and the extravascular defibrillators and ICDs, and not to forget the PFA. So, in persistent AFib versus P5 versus thermal ablation, efficacy almost similar but safer. Ablation today is a class 1 indication if you have atrial fibrillation with heart failure. So efficacy is about 68% with this device, almost about 72% with the PFI. So antiarrhythmics also as well. Also VT ablations, irrespective of the etiology, is the first line therapy even before you give an ICD. So I'm referring to the PAUSE ICD trial which said 42% reductions in sustained recurrent VTs, so which is a paradigm shift in the departure to the standard clinical therapy. Talk us regarding the ablation therapies which were game changers here. Talk us about the ablation therapies, VT as well as the atrial fibrillations.
So we have to understand together understand a couple of things. Radio frequency ablation for ischemic VT has to be offered post-ICD. Post-ICD.
Post-ICD.
Always post-ICD. Radio frequency ablation in non-ischemic cardiomyopathy or in situations like ARVC can be given pre-ICD. So ischemic subset is the highest risk.
Absolutely.
So there is no question of doubt in that subset. Talking about AF ablation, what he's referring to PFA is pulsed field ablation. We also give high power short duration, it's called HPSD ablation. Together we have to understand that AF ablation is class 1 indication with only two subsets. One, when the patient has heart failure, and second, if he is very symptomatic atrial fibrillation. You are not supposed to give otherwise. Why is it that atrial fibrillation ablation is still not taken off in India? It's still not doing well. Why? A, the cost of the procedure itself in Indian subset is not equal to the reward that the patient gets. Sitting at a 68 to 70% success, the patient has to spend about 4 to 5 lakh rupees. He comes back and post ablation you still give NOACs. The patient comes back that I still have symptoms, I still have AF, what have you done? So we together should be very sincere. We should understand our shortcomings before we make them spend that kind of money. Second, it is not a procedure which is go in and come out very easy. You can induce the patient to have stroke because you're working for long times in the left atrium. You have to have a very controlled environment in the left atrium with blood thinning with continuous heparin so that the patient does not suffer a stroke. Third, the patient can develop pericardial tamponade. You as a clinical physician should be ready to accept those complications and educate your patient before you refer to an electrophysiologist. What does this imply? He really has to be symptomatic before you offer them ablation. He really has to be heart failure and you should have exhausted therapy. These guidelines are made by a subset of people sitting in the United States where things are very different and distinct from India. You can argue that they say people make guidelines for ICD. But yes, there you're saving a life. So the ICD guidelines have to be followed and embraced. But AF guidelines, we should really treat our patients and be against the wall. The patient should be well educated. It is not a 1-hour job. In India, doing an AF ablation is nearly impossible for an electrophysiologist because we are so few. A good AF ablation should be at least 4 to 5 hours job if you want to give him good end result. Otherwise, don't do it. So these are the challenges that we have with AF ablation in India. Yes, as the electrophysiologist's number gets better, we will be able to do. But we have significantly increased our volume of VT ablations. Why and how is that? It is because we have gotten better on VT ablations. Because our patients of ICDs, when they come back with shocks, they can be very, very uncomforting. And a VT ablation is very high successful in those subsets. Also, idiopathic VT ablation is very successful. So there is a distinction between AF and VT.
Wonderful, ma'am. So, if we have hands like Dr. Aparna Jaiswal, it doesn't matter whether it is, ablation through thermal or through the other way. So, ma'am, let's talk a little about the CSP. See, the EP community, you are a member of that, is loving this the CSP. So, the traditional treatment for heart failure has been the CRT with biventricular pacing. Now, with the HIS bundle and the left bundle pacing, CRT significant benefits seen in mortality in heart failure hospitalizations and increased synchrony, more physiological as compared to the biventricular pacing. So talk us about the CSP.
I think I'm going to keep it very brief.
Would you like to?
I keep it very brief.
Yes. Okay.
Conduction system pacing is a new technology for pacing. We as electrophysiologists have embraced it. We are doing CSP for every patient who needs a bradycardia pacemaker when the ejection fraction is between 35 and 50%. CSP in lieu of CRT should only be given when you cannot implant a CRT. CSP can be used along with CRT, but should not, today we don't have guidelines with clarity that CSP can replace CRT.
Right. Talk us through the tri-CRT, see, which is for in severe heart failure, that tri-CRT, triventricular CRT.
I'm not aware of this trial.
This was a recent trial presented in the recent heart failure in the Heart Rhythm Society.
Maybe next year.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Take a mic. Take a mic. Madam, mic.
Diabetic with CKD with protein. It will retard kidney coming down. These criteria have to be fulfilled. Diabetic, CKD with protein. Then only Finerenone. There is a big problem with Finerenone is hyperkalemia. So you have to be sure the patient is not hyperkalemic. Very good molecule. No way can you replace aldosterone with Finerenone in heart failure. There is no place for it. It is only a very niche area right now with Finerenone. Because the success of atrial fibrillation is 68 to 70%.
That's right.
Come back, exactly.
Why the cost is 4 to 5 days
Because it uses its mapping system, 3-dimensional mapping system. And then they have to use extra catheters. That's it.
Use mic.
Yeah, Dr. Sirin wants to ask you.
I just want to you have one case you discussed, a 30-year-old boy has been implanted with ICD. I just want to know what is the life of this?
Yes, very nice. So, the longevity of these devices now varies anywhere. When we started off, they were 3 to 5 years.
15 years.
Now they can go anywhere from 8 to 15 years. So yeah, they're very, very robust battery devices now available.
So, any more questions? So, thank you. I think I will request Dr. Kalra to summarize the same. Excellent, Semi. Just one comment from me.
My friends, it was wonderful, mesmerizing talk and very, very elaborate interaction with all my gems, my friends. So, ma'am, what happened to the one Mr. Akash who got some presidential recognition also for impending MI? There was some protein recognized and it was, they could predict that MI is impending. Do you have any idea?
No, I didn't know that. I have no idea.
And my last, and I am repeating, friends, I am repeating my question. If I know my, say, some friend is having ICD implanted, rather CRT de-implanted, so I should always say namaste to him rather than shaking hand.
No.
कहीं उसको शॉक लग गया मेरे को लग गया तो
I thought you said he was your friend.
yeah
What were friends for? Hold them. Help them. You know, okay.
अच्छा आप रहते तो साथ जिएंगे साथ मरेंगे
No, you know how the ICD was invented? It was invented by a man called Dr. Mishan Radowski. You know why he invented it? It was FDA approved in 1985. In 1977, roughly around that time, he was going off with his friend and his friend died in his arms. So he worked hard to invent an ICD so that his next friend would not die. So what are friendships for?
ये तो मैं तैयार हूँ कि मैं साथ में but I'm asking in person is having
Not at all.
no issue not to worry
The question should be framed a shock if he is getting sick.
Can you predict it when he will have shock?
How can you, if you predict it?
If I am shaking hand in hand with
So what?
You can't.
My last comment to my friends, very recently, very recently, 3 days back, my friend in my society, in my building, had certain cardiac arrest. I went and just did CPR. He was revived. But he just wanted to recommend that all my friends should be well versed with how to do CPR, because we are doctors. People expect from us. Then we follow the regulations. All right.
Have you had a CPR session? We should do one.
Yeah, we should.
Okay, I'll take it forward.
Well, let it be done
But
next
can it be
week.
done, no, can it be done during the day hours?
If you want a proper CPR session, it should be during maybe afternoon or maybe post-lunch session. So that's a question. Saturday, that can be discussed. I think we will request Dr.